Hello, Forgers, and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host, Ben, also known as Ankh, and joining me today we have...
Hey, this is Nate. Weekend.
So today we're going to continue our four-part review of Battle for Whitefang Pass with the Tempys faction. In this series, we are going over each card introduced in Battle for Whitefang Pass. We've had the opportunity to play with these over the last few months, so now we figured it's a good time to kind of go over our impressions of them. So we'll do all the holistic creatures, the forge creatures, the modifiers, spells, and the soul binds. And just in addition to our opinions, we kind of want to talk about this a little bit in terms of power level. So to give context to that with the creatures, we want to kind of look at the stat progression as it goes with like a combat tactician, where you have at level 1 we have 12 points of stats to work with. At level 2, we have 18 points of stats to work with, and at level 3, we have 27 points of stat to work with. So this will just kind of give us a baseline understanding of how the developers value the abilities, and it'll help us kind of talk about whether we think the abilities are worth it given the sort of stat bonuses or penalties that are applied to the creatures. So let's go ahead and we'll start off with our first card from Battle for Whitefang Pass. So again, we're starting with the holistic creatures, and let's start off with Charger Mammoth. I'll go ahead and take this one. So Charger Mammoth, it's a 4/4 with aggressive and breakthrough at level 1, and when you replace it, it gets +4/+4. The creature that you're replacing, it gets +4/+4 aggressive and breakthrough for the turn. So it's kind of like Gizmo in effect. And the stat progression goes from 4/4 to 6/6 to 8/8, and it gets the same amount of bonus stats. In terms of kind of like the penalty you're getting, you're losing out about 4 stats at level 1, 6 stats at level 2, and 11 stats at level 3. So it's not a very strong creature at level 3 in terms of what you're getting just for the body, but it does have a pretty strong ability. So what are your thoughts on this one, Nate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are losing some stats, but the aggressive and breakthrough, I think, add a lot of utility to this card, and then you're getting even more with the replaceability that just adds the base stats right back to the next creature. So really like it. I think Tempys needed some good solid beasts in set 2, and this is one of them. From my own experience playing with this card, it's situational, but I'm a big fan of it. I think if you can get value off maybe a partial trade and then the following turn replace it to give that full benefit of the 4/4 to the next creature and breakthrough, you'll get the most value out of this card. So yeah, find opportunities to use it, and don't feel bad leveling it. It's great all the way through the game. It really lets you use your off forge turns as well to do some damage.
Yeah, it's especially good like if you can do it as a second play off forge to push through a few points of damage, and then save the body or like run over a small minion like a mindless zombie, and then immediately replace it when you're on forge the next turn. If you do it, if you're on forge and you play it, you do telegraph a little bit of your play, because it's going to get caught by just about anything. So either they're going to kill it, or you're going to put something monstrous on it, and then they're going to kill that with like a dreadbolt or something. So you just got to be careful with how you play it, because it sort of suffers from the whole thing of it like telegraphs your play. But yeah, I think it's a solid card. I think it plays pretty well. Let's go on to Herald of Fury. What are your thoughts on this one, Nate?
Yes, this is a warrior mage. It's a 5/3 at level 1. When it deploys, you can deal 5 damage to one of your creatures and then play a level 1 spell for free. So you're taking a little bit of a stat hit, right? You're losing 4 stats, but you have a warrior and a mage, which synergizes really well. The attack here stays at 5, which is really helpful too. I think it'll at least clean up and in combat with a lot of creatures that are at level 1. And then the free spells can't be understated. The value there, I think, can't be overstated. I think there's a lot of value to any free spell play, and Tempys has several of them in set 2, and this one's great. What do you think, though, Ben?
Yeah, I like it. The nice thing is that by the time you get to level 3, it can hit itself to get the free spell, and then it kind of functions like a Stormcaller, where instead of you taking damage, it takes damage. The one thing I will note is that I found that when you're playing with this card and you're wanting to try and utilize it, you need to make sure you have a decent number of level 1 creatures that have 6 or more health. in your deck. If you don't have enough targets, then playing the level 1 can be kind of painful, because you're kind of playing an understated body, and you may not have something that'll survive the 5 points of damage to get the free spell off. So, you know, it's still a fine play if you're trying to catch something and finish it off if you're off Forge. But it's very frail. Like, it'll definitely trade down if you're just kind of throwing it out there. But if you get it as like a 2-for-1, it's also very nice with things like Thundersoar, certain types of Shardback, which we'll talk about later, just as like proccing those damage synergies. But yeah, I like that Tempys got another sort of free spell play creature in addition to the Urinate Elementalist and the chaining creatures, just like giving us a couple more ways to really hone into that spell synergy.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think it's just a solid card. I mean, it has a little bit of a stat penalty as you go across, but it makes up for that with just the free spell play. You could easily recount, get back all that loss of stats.
Yeah, the only other card that reminds me of it would be Spite Maiden, where you're taking the 5 damage, and you actually take a bigger stat penalty for Spite Maiden. So I think I like Herald of Fury better than Spite Maiden. I'm glad to see Tempys retain, like you said, in set 2, this ability to like ramp past and into cycle 2 and 3 by extra actions from your creatures. So yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, because free stuff is good.
Free stuff is good.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about Icelance Magus. So this is one of those creatures that has the new Slay ability. So for level 1, it reads Slay, deal 2 damage to the enemy player, and has an Activate to deal 1 damage to a creature, and starts off as a 5/3. So you can use that 1 point of damage Activate to actually also trigger the Slay, because it's considered to have killed the creature when you do it that way. The other, as it levels up, we have about a 5-point stat penalty, and then about a 10-point stat penalty. But you make up for that quite a bit with the amount of damage scaling, because the Activate goes from 1 to 2 to 4 in terms of how it scales as the game goes on, which is really good at just like finishing off those creatures that survive the previous turn's combat. And it can also like, get in there, trade with something, and deal some extra damage, kind of like Banshee from Necrium that we're familiar with. It has a very similar proc, but it also gets to like direct damage wherever you want it. What are your thoughts on this one, Nate?
Yeah, I think you said a lot of the benefits. The one other thing that I've seen this used a lot is with Rumble Spark, Embodiment and Elemental, where before combat you could slay something with this, and if it's in that lane, it allows you to flip the Soulbind, the Exalt. So yeah, we'll definitely a lot of value here. Yeah,
we'll definitely be talking about that towards the end of the program. We have a lot to talk about with Rumble Spark, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just a solid creature all around. It's got a decent attack stat. It's fairly aggressive. You are taking it's frail, right? It's easy to kill, but it helps you clean off minions and other creatures later in the game that don't quite die in combat. So yeah, let's
love it.
What about Mystical Teacher?
Yeah, this is the first of the elemental synergies that we're seeing in set 2, and really strong. I think this is another card that can damage the opponent before combat, which is important. So Mystical Teacher is a 4/5 mage at level 1. It has mobility, which is strong in my opinion as a card feature, but maybe not overly strong. So glad to see that it has mobility. And then it says when you play an elemental in a lane adjacent to it, you can deal 2 damage to a creature or player. That scales up to 3 and 5 damage, I believe, at level 3, but 4 damage.
Yeah, it goes 4
2,
and
4, 6.
2, 4,
Yeah.
6, yeah. And the mobility
very strong.
also scales up as well, which is good.
Yeah, mobility 2, mobility 3. Yeah, so it's very good. Its stat line it's probably its biggest asset. You're not taking a lot of penalty for mobility and direct or indirect damage to creatures. It's great. I love it a lot. I think this is one of my favorite cards of set 2. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, it's nice. Like you said, it's another one of those. If you happen to roll it in a Rumble Spark deck, it's another way to deal direct damage to a player. It pairs really well with the Forge Creature Master because it's a mage. It'll trigger master to play a spell sprite or spell swarm, and which you can put next to it, deal some damage in the process. Looking at Battle for Whitefang Pass, there's actually 14 elementals or ways to make the elemental minions. So that's a pretty high density of elementals. As we'll see, there are other sort of creature type payoff or synergies within the set, and they don't have as good of a density of the elementals. I will say that their elementals don't show up in any of the other factions naturally. Either you have to have like Betrayer, or something called, and there's like a Utera card that can create a spell sprite. But other than that, like you're going to be totally reliant on your Tempys elementals to power this, and if you don't roll enough cards that make elementals in the deck, this can be kind of a weaker card in the deck. But another thing to note is that Sunder still has the create elemental or create the spell sprites or spell swarm ability as one of her Forge Borns. So that's another way to kind of get the guaranteed elemental to proc it. But you're only losing 3, 6, 9 stats, and it's health. It's weighted more towards health than attack, so it can survive a couple turns and put out some damage just by doing what you want to do, which is play creatures.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
it's a great card.
I dig it. Let's see what we got next. So Nargoth Commander. So Nargoth Commander is another one of our warriors. It doesn't actually have too bad of a stat penalty. It's -2, -4, -6 over the three cycle, or the 3 levels, and it's actually weighted towards health in terms of how strong it is. So it's actually got a pretty good survivability. What it reads is that you activate it, you do 2 damage to the creatures adjacent to it to give them +2 attack, +4 attack, or +6 attack. The nice thing is that the damage doesn't scale, but the attack does scale as the game goes on, so that 2 damage becomes less and less relevant. But it's a good way to sort of repeatedly increase the damage that your other creatures are doing. It's also, I think we talked about this a little bit in the Aloyan episode when we talked about emboldening, but it's nice to be, if you get it off Forge, you can pump up an on-Forge creature that's unblocked. So that's another sort of way of pushing more damage with it. What's been your experience with it? I know it pairs really well with Thundersword, but have you had any other sort of thoughts on this one? Because I haven't played with it too much.
Yeah, I was just thinking a lot of these set 2 Tempys are situationally strong, and this is another great example. Like, I definitely have used this to good effect in the right decks. If you're sitting with weak creatures, then this ability is less valuable. But I like this card a lot. I think self damage on a Tempys creature is sort of an acceptable trade-off for most Tempys decks where you're being aggressive. Like, either your creature is going to die in combat or not, so sometimes pushing that extra damage is more than worth 2 damage to your own creature that's probably either going to trade out anyway or do its thing and then die. So yeah,
especially
I'm
strong.
very happy with this.
Yeah, it's especially strong as like an off Forge play, like a second turn off Forge play, just because your opponent's not going to expect that attack boost most of the time. They're gonna lose that creature they were trying to just eke out the winning that fight. So
yeah, what was our phrase? Messing with combat.
Messing with combat. Yep. This is definitely one of those cards, the messing with combat cards.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's keep on going. This is actually one I really like. This is the Rageborn Eruptor. So this guy, do you want to take this one?
Sure. He's a 4/6 elemental that has breakthrough, which is nice to see on any creature, and then a deploy that says give this +1 attack for each exalt in play. So that includes your opponent's exalts, and this is something that it scales well. I think it's 1, 2, 3, and the stat line doesn't get too out of control. It's weighted towards health, up to 13 health at level 3. The elemental synergy is very strong. We'll see in the spells as well in set 2. So this being an elemental, I rate it even higher than mages or warriors or anything else it could be. And then the breakthrough is a very valuable asset for some of the soul binds and other things that we see in set 2 as well. So I love this card. I think it's actually one that will only get stronger in the future as well as more decks include exalts.
Yeah.
But Ben, I know you've played a lot of elemental synergy. What and this card? What do you think in terms of
Uh,
how to use it?
well, yeah, I mean, in terms of like Exalt synergy, I've played decks that are heavy on Exalts, and this is very punishing to a deck that has a lot of against a deck with a lot of Exalts. Uh, the interesting thing is that it doesn't have a very high attack boost early on, but one of the things about Exalts is that they stick around, and as the game progresses and you're getting closer to cycle 3, you're going to have a critical mass of them out. Either you're playing them or your opponent's playing them. So it can act as a big deterrent to your opponent playing their Exalts, especially ones that don't self-destruct. And you can easily get like 3, 4, 5 procs on this thing by the time you get to cycle 3. So it may not, like as an earlier play, it may not be as exciting, but even if you just have 2 Exalts at cycle 2 out, it's a 9/9. It's right on curve. So it can hit really hard, and the breakthrough makes a big difference with this. And like I said, it's a good deterrent to your opponent overloading on Exalts. So I've been on the receiving end of this more than I've been on the dealing end, and I can confirm that it's very punishing for decks that like to play Exalts. So
I think the one other thing to note is that the health line here, especially in cycle 2 and 3, where this is a level 2 card, 9 health on an elemental is probably the highest. I mean, Worm I think is much lower, and some of the others that are out there are lower. Even a spell sprite, you don't usually get a swarm until maybe cycle 3, late cycle 2.
right.
So this sets up a lot of cards too. So if you have some of the other cards we're going to talk about, this might be a really good elemental to make sure that's included in your deck.
Yeah, and it can like tussle with an Oak Father for a turn at least, even if it can't kill it. Like it can survive a hit from an Oak Father and still be there for the elemental synergies.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, let's move.
All good cards so far. All good cards
so far. All right, let's talk about the Tortoise Colossus. So this guy is a 5/5 at level 1, so you're only taking a 2-point stat penalty. 8/8 level 2, still just taking a 2-point stat penalty, and a 12/12 at 3, so it's like a 3-point. So it's not really that far under curve, but what you get out of it is a lot. So it's a mobility 1 defender at level 1, but you can activate it to have it lose defender and get aggressive. So you can kind of move it in 3 different directions. You can move it left, right, or forward. So it has a lot of flexibility. You get to decide when you want it to be attacking. You get to move it when you need to catch something, and the mobility also scales up to 2 and 3. I think just as far as like a holistic creature, it's pretty good. There's been a lot of times where I've been able to catch something with it, have it survive that combat, and then move into a lane and kill something else. Like it's very easy to do a 2-for-1 with this guy. You'd be surprised because again, the fact that you get to control whether it moves forward or not is a big deal. So what are your thoughts on it, Nate?
Yeah, it's a weird art for those who can't see it. It's like this turtle, but it's also a dinosaur, and it's got like slug-like antenna coming out the front, and it's a weird ability. In set 1 we had nothing like this, so yeah. I mean, not only is it losing defender, which is I think common in set 2, but was pretty rare or non-existent in set 1. Maybe a card.
Yeah, I mean, there's like rooted, but you had to like meet a certain condition for that. Like this is the first one where you get to decide if you want it to be in the front or in the back. So
right, and it's great. I think the dinosaur synergy is strong. The 5 health is strong. But it's just a weird card. I think the art and the abilities are weird, and for some reason I'm not excited to play this card. But you're right; it's usually a 2-for-1, and it's good value. Yeah.
It's just like a solid. Like it's not a bad card. It's not like it's got a low. It's got a high floor and a low ceiling, right? It just does what it needs to do.
Yeah.
All right, and we've got one more holistic creature. So let's talk about the Unstable Vortex.
So Unstable Vortex is a 1/8 elemental, and it acts like a spell sprite where every spell you play it's going to give it some attack. So at level 1 it's 2, level 2 it's 3, and then level 4 I think it's 4. But the kicker here is that you at any point you can activate it to sacrifice it and deal its current attack value to another creature. But if you do, you have to destroy the vortex. So it's like a spell that can build up strength over time. That's also a creature, and then you can choose if you want to get some value in combat, and then destroy it to shoot it at something. In theory, this is a great card. It's also an elemental with big health, and I think one of the bummers of this is it sort of slows down tempo starting at 1/8. It's more of something that you're gonna need to have several spell plays to
Hmm.
get it to where it's damaging your opponent. And in the meantime, they have some opportunities to deal with it. But what do you think, Ben, playing this card? I know you've played it quite a bit, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've played it a bit. The 8 health is really strong.
Mm.
It kind of takes like you said, it takes a little bit of time to ramp up. But if you have enough of a spell density and there's spells that you want to be playing, it only takes like one or two triggers for this to become very potent. Especially as a sort of removal spell on a stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's good
Hmm.
the high toughness allows it usually to take at least one hit in combat. It can weaken a creature or straight out kill a creature, and then throw itself at another creature when its health is low before your opponent has a chance to finish it off with like incidental damage. So yeah, I like it. I think it really only takes like one or two procs of the or triggers of the attack increase to kind of meet or exceed sort of the stat curve. So if you're playing it in a deck that either cares about elemental synergies or wants to play a lot of spells,
Hmm.
it's a pretty high priority card to play in my opinion, especially if you don't have a lot of ways to sort of bolster your life total or regain life, like if you're not playing Necroneum or Utera. It's good to have the incidental blocking early on and then being able to force through high amounts of damage later. Again, it's not that big of a threat like open lane until you get a couple spells off.
Hmm.
Like it just starts
Yeah.
out at one power, but it can grow out of control, and the high toughness can keep it around even if you don't want to just use its activate ability. So
Maybe we can come back later and talk about it, but maybe in set two, as I think about my experience, there's maybe different lines that Tempys can be played, and
mhm.
one of them definitely is that spell synergy, like you're talking about, and this is control and synergy all day, elemental spell,
Yeah,
removal, health, like this is definitely a control line, and then there's plenty of other creatures, like we've seen some that are just straight up aggro, value, free plays, try and go for their face, so
yeah, this
maybe it
feels like a very
depends.
controlling card, like you said. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's great at that. It's really good. Top tier.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our last of our holistic creatures. So let's go on to the forged creatures. So let's start off
Mhm.
with the combat evoker. So these forged creatures are all going to be the ones that are introduced in Battle for Whitefang Pass. So evoker, its line of text is it's a mage, and when you play a spell, you give it +1/+1, +2/+2 at level 2, and then +3/+3 at level 3. In terms of kind of what that ability is costing you, it's costing you about 2 stats at level 1, 4 at level 2, and 6 at level 3. And it just so happens to work out that one trigger of this will get you right back in line with on curve.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, if you're in a spell heavy deck, uh, this seems like just a pretty fine card. It doesn't scale quite as much as something like Kindred does, but spells are a lot more common than sources of life gain. So I can
Mhm.
understand why they were a little bit more, I guess, reserved in how much attack and health it gives. But since you're not taking much of a stat penalty on the front end, I think if your game plan is, again, is like a spell heavy deck, I think
Mhm.
it is a perfectly valid threat, and especially depending on what other modifier you get to it. What about your thoughts? Have you played with them? It's a rare, so I haven't played with it much. Or have you?
Yeah, I haven't. And then a lot of my Tempest decks from set two, I'm trying to play aggressive rather than control. I think everything you said's true. And it's great. I think, was it researching that Aloyan got for the Kindred like synergy? And so it's
Yeah,
good to see Tempest get something to that effect.
yeah. It's also nice that it's not just giving attack like spell sprites and such do, right? You're getting a little bit
Oh,
of a
good
health
point.
boost too. So like it increases its survivability over time. So
The only other thought too is that this is really cool art. If you're listening to this
yeah.
without the YouTube video, I think this speaks to the cool art that we got in set two. Set one art didn't do it for me, but you see cards like this in set two, and it's just like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
She's really feeling the fire and growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, love it. So let's move on to the Frost Hulk. Now this is a weird one. Why don't you take this, Nate? I think
Yeah,
you've
this
been
is gonna be
trying to pick this
controversial.
up.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe we agree, maybe we don't. But so Frost Hulk is he has modifiers, some better than others. I think you're taking a pretty good stat hit for this creature's ability, and what it is. So bear with us here. At level 1, it says at the start of combat that turn, your creatures don't deal combat damage. Your creatures. And then at level 2, it says no creatures deal combat damage. And then at level 3, it's your opponent's creatures do not deal combat damage that turn. There are some caveats in the rule structure about what this does and doesn't affect Krogius. But yeah,
Yeah.
potentially a very strong card that you're taking a very big penalty for at level 1.
Yeah, I
I
mean
don't love it. What do you think?
the
Yeah, what do
overall
you think?
stat penalty is not that bad, but it's got a it's very weighted to attack. Like the stat penalties, you're losing 2, 3, and 4 stats over the progression, but it's so heavily weighted towards attack that it doesn't have a very good survivability unless you have the correct forge modifier for it. And because you know in SolForge you don't get to decide what your hand is made up of, and you can't
Mhm.
save cards for later turns. So it's very hard with this card to line it up to be super profitable for you, right? Like
Yeah.
an ability like this, you want to be able to trigger at the right time, like a Forgeborn ability, right? Not just
Mhm.
on the particular combat you happen to draw it, because you could have like a completely empty board one turn. They may not have anything. Everything might be, you know, it's just it's a lot to line up, and given the nature of how the game plays out,
Mhm.
I just don't think it does enough,
Yeah.
especially with it being a low health, high attack. With the
Mhm.
first 2 levels, what you're looking at is you don't get that initial hit of it, and then it's very frail, so your opponent can take it out with a spell or some other ability before it gets to use that high attack to kill something, or
Mhm.
hit face with it. So some people have tried doing things like Necrium and Oloyan to try and skip the first or second level, but even then, I just don't know that the payoff on the 3rd level is worth all that extra effort that you're going through earlier in the game. It is an
Yeah.
elemental, so it does have that going for it in some terms of synergy, but I just haven't been super. I've never really wanted to play it when I draw it in the decks that have it, right? So it's an interesting ability, but I just don't think it's that strong. Um, it's like it's like a really high ceiling, but are extremely low floor, right? And that's
Yeah.
only the high ceiling at the higher levels. Like it's not even a high. It's got a really high floor at the early levels, so it's just
Yeah, I
not
think it's
something.
notable.
Yeah,
It's
go ahead.
notable as a mechanic too, because this is the first time I could think of in set 1 or 2 that you do not want to play level 1. It's not just a bad return for your level 1 card play. It is awful, right? Like
Right.
you're investing in your future by turning off all your creatures combat that turn and then potentially doing it again in cycle 2, maybe situationally, but you're losing 2 of your turns of combat in the first 6 turns of the game, right? So
Right.
at best, even if you skip level 1, you're still taking a penalty. It's interesting. I would have loved to hear how Stoneblade talked when they designed this card, because you're taking a real negative. This is not just play a gizmo and upgrade a card. This is not just give something minus attack and upgrade a
Right.
card. This
This is
is like
literally
hurt
do nothing.
yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
like literally do nothing.
right.
um, and it's especially punishing if you draw it while you're on Forge for that first level, because you throw it out there, it's not going to do any damage. They can just throw something in front of it to kill it.
Yeah,
Um, if you're lucky, you'll get it when you're off Forge. You can put it in an open lane, and then you're just taking a bunch of damage from your opponent. So it's you can't guarantee you're going to draw it at the right time, and that's where it really suffers. You
Yeah.
want cards that are going to be good no matter whether you're on Forge or off Forge. So,
Yeah.
haven't
Totally
been
agree.
super impressed with the Frost Hulk, but
Mm-hmm.
I will say the Hawk Rider is a different story. So, the Hawk Rider is one of the new it's part of the cycle of cards where it gives you a benefit if you play it at a lower level than your Forgeborn. So you're basically playing it as an underdrop. With this one, its deployability is that you give 2 of your creatures +3 attack, +5 attack, or +7 attack. It has to be other creatures. But of all the ones that follow this cycle, I like this one actually the best. It does have a stat penalty of 3, 5, and 7. It does suffer from the fact that its stats are not that great as an underdrop, but it is attack heavy. Despite the stat penalty is all towards its health and not its attack, which means that even if you are playing it as an underdrop, you can fairly often play it in a way that you're going to catch one of your opponent's creatures and increase the attack on 2 of your other creatures. That'll either push additional damage through or trade up with your opponent's creatures. Again, the messing with combat TM, it really has a pretty substantial impact on the board compared to a lot of the other ones of these particular ones where it's got the lower, you have to play it as a lower level than your Forgeborn, or it does literally nothing. So, what are your thoughts on this one, Nate? Have you played with the Hawk Rider much?
Yeah, and I was just thinking I've used it a lot to a lot better effect than the Engineer or the Lotus or the other underdrop cards from set 2. I think of them, this is probably my favorite, and the weighting towards attack makes this card also pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, maybe we see more Yeti synergy in the future. Kind of sad that it's a Yeti, but maybe in the future it gets some payoff there as well. And then
Yeah,
I think in our
Yeti
previous
riding a hawk.
cool art,
Yeah, the
yeah.
art's cool.
And then I think we talked about it, but like, yeah, maybe these underdrop cards just aren't as good. It's a cool idea, but to see the benefit of an underdrop card, you have to be into cycle 4 to see the level 3 of the card, and yeah, it's tough to get the most out of, but it's situationally very good. I found this to be pretty effective situationally.
Yeah. I mean, like we had talked about in the Aloyn episode, the stats that you're getting from it is not equivalent to level 2, and you want to be playing level 2 cards in cycle 2. So, it's obviously, if your deck is not upgrade heavy or free play heavy, you're going to have level 1s. You're just going to have those hands where you're stuck with level 1s, and this is a good level 1 to have in that situation. So let's move on to one I know is near and dear to your heart, the Shardback.
Wow. This is a standout from set 2, absolutely. Shardbacks are dinosaurs. They have very cool art, and they also have a really great stat line for what they do. So Shardbacks say when it's dealt damage and non-combat damage, then you or it deals 2 damage to all enemy creatures. And this scales from 2 damage to 3 damage to 5 damage at level 3. And the weight is slightly towards health on the stat line. So Shardbacks are not typically, depending on their fuse, depending on their modifier and their fuse, they could be a little weaker, but they tend to have 5, 6 health at level 1, and then in the teens by level 3, which makes their ability pretty usable day to day. And then with certain modifiers, which you could talk about, Ben, this becomes pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about some of those modifiers as we one of them is new to the set that we'll talk about, which is Furious, and we'll come back to this when we talk about Furious. But if your deck, to really utilize this, you're gonna want cards that either do incidental damage like Firestorm, or damage to everything, or things that like allow it to battle. So it pairs really nicely with Utera, because Utera has several fight cards. And it's all dinosaur, and Utera is also dinosaur heavy. But being able to repeatedly just do this one-sided area of effect ability where it's damaging all your opponent's creatures, knocking out random gizmos or wisps easily, or finishing off stuff that didn't survive that survived the previous combat. As long as you have enough enablers in your deck and it's not self-solving, it's a good card. But if you don't have ways to trigger the non-combat damage clause, your opponent's not really going to do that for you. Right? There's not a ton of cards that specifically do damage to all creatures in the game. So unless they have, like, most of it's single target, right? So they're not going to target this. You need a way to do it yourself, whether it's a Forge Worn ability or otherwise. Yeah, but we'll come back to this when we talk about the Furious modifier, because that is a very good combination with this.
One more thought on Shardback, and I think you hinted at it and said it in so few words, but it changes. I think a lot of people came into SolForge thinking they could manage the board and leave things at 1 or 2 health, and this is a good example where, like, this is not Keyforge or a different game like that I've heard where it's like, okay, I won that battle, caught the other opponent's creature, and now I'm fine. I get a whole new. This card changes that equation, right? When I play against a Shardback, I'm very reluctant to let it be at a one health catch on the opponent's creature, right? Because the next turn could be Shardback, and then I've just been valued out pretty hard. So
yeah, it works both ways, right? Your opponent needs to be careful. It forces your opponent to be careful about, like, how much health they're leaving their creature at, and they also have to be careful not to let this live at a low health, because if you have another ability to trigger it, you're going to use it and continue to wipe their board with it. So yeah, it doesn't sound like it does a lot, but it kind of really changes the way the game plays out once it hits the table. Assuming they don't have something like a Batanimate or a Dreadbolt to just remove it straight up. So yeah, I think this is a very cool, and it's a common, so you'll see it a lot. And then we got one more forged creature to talk about, which is the Smash Fist. So this guy's a warrior. His special ability is Slay. Give another one of your creatures +2 attack. At level 2, it's +4 attack, and at level 3, it is +6 attack. In terms of, like, what that ability is costing you, it's costing you 2 health, 3 health, and then 4 health. So you're losing a little bit of health or a little bit of stats for that ability, but it keeps a high attack. So there's a good chance you're gonna get a return on it if you can keep a creature alive. But as far as, like, abilities go, it's not that exciting to me. From my perspective, it kind of suffers from the same thing that the Medic does when we talked about Aloyan, in that you want this +2 attack to happen before combat, not after combat. So you need ways to, like, have it fight, or have like an ability like Pyromatic, where it will just, like, hit something and then you get that extra bonus. What's been your experience with this?
Yeah, same thing exactly. I'm a little underwhelmed by it because of the fact that it's gonna die in a lot of combat situations. Yeah, I mean, this is a combat one that we're looking at, but so its stats are even a little better. But a lot of these die in their first combat, so you're just getting +2 attack after combat. And in Tempys, my personal playstyle with Tempys is to leave lanes open, so I have, like, some flexibility in where I'm playing things, and oftentimes that means my board's empty at the end of combat, but I've done really cool things. So then I reap 0 benefit off Smash Fist. He's not an elemental, so he doesn't. There's not a lot of good warrior synergy in set 2, so you have to look elsewhere to make this card a priority play.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's just a common. It doesn't have to be super exciting, but it's just, I've been underwhelmed by it. It's got the new Slay mechanic, but the payoff is just not really there for me.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, so that's our last new forged creature. So let's talk about the modifiers. So it's gonna look a little weird, but just to keep it kind of consistent, I'm gonna use the Tactician so we can kind of see how the stats work out for these different abilities, since we know that the Tactician starts at the 6/6. So let's talk about blitzing. Do you want to take blitzing?
Sure, yeah, this is a great one. I like mobility. I've said it several times
Mhm.
already, but blitzing gives you mobility and breakthrough at the cost of 2 health. I would trade that for most cards. I think the breakthrough alone late game will give a lot of value, and then mobility. Yeah, as said before, although you don't have a Yeti War Caller in like set two, I think mobility still allows you to approach combat in very cool ways and affect combat change.
Mhm.
So yeah, very happy to see this on a card, and have used it well on the cards I have it on. How about
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I mean, the breakthrough. It's nice that you don't lose anything to its attack because you want high attack creatures um, when you're dealing with breakthrough. The fact that you do lose a little bit of health means it often will trade in combat the first time, so sometimes the mobility is not as good in that situation. Because when you think about it, like if you're on Forge and you play it, then they have a chance to catch it, right, or kill it,
Mm,
and so the mobility, being able to mobility it off Forge is just not always a reality. But you know, it's a since it has the breakthrough, it's a good card where you can like move it to catch something and then do a little bit of damage on top of that if it's in the front row. So um, yeah, and I guess like if you're on Forge and it's your first play, it kind of
mhm.
puts your opponent to the test of where they're going to put their first creature play if they're not going to kill it outright. Because if they try and put it to block it, you're going to move it, right? And then
Yeah, yeah,
they've wasted their blocker for that turn. So you
yeah.
know, it has a lot of applications. So it's basically fleet and stampeding put together
Mm,
for a unique Tempys ability. So yeah, not too bad.
yeah.
So let's talk about the
Here it
keyword,
is.
the Furious.
Go ahead. Tell us
All
all
right,
about it.
let's talk about Furious. So Furious is the Forge modifier. It says activate, deal 2 damage to this to give it +2 attack. That goes up to +4 attack and then +6 attack. So like the Nargoth Commander, you're only ever doing 2 damage to the creature, but you're getting increasing amounts of attack as a benefit. Interestingly, the penalty you're getting, stats wise, is -1, -1, and -2. So, and it's all health loaded, right? So at level 1, you're getting like +3 to the health, right? You're getting like a 4/7 up to like a 6/11 and then an 8/17. So it's very health heavy, and it makes sense, right? Because if you're gonna be, it's basically what you're doing is you're trading health for attack, and it sort of gives you that flexibility of, do I want more health right now or do I want more attack right now? Problem with this ability is shardback.
Mhm.
And do you want to talk about how this works with shardback, Nate?
Yeah. And we haven't talked about Necreum, but Necreum got a similar ability in set two. So I think it's fine on its own, and I really like it. I think it's generous of them to give health weighting on these creatures as well. As you can see in this example, it's 7 health to start on level one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's generous of them to design that. And I think it was an oversight when it came to Shardback. I mean, I'll be frank, I don't think they
Yeah,
thought that one through.
yeah.
That
I think
Furious.
we've talked to them, and I think it was an oversight, right? Like you said, I think it was just a mistake. That it shouldn't have been, because it's self-solving with the shardback, right? So with the shardback, you activate it, deal 2 damage to the shardback, and then the shardback immediately triggers and does the combat damage to that, not that damage to the board. And so what you have is a situation where you have sort of a Blizzard Shaman effect without the ability to kill itself, and it's one-sided, right? Because it's only doing 2 damage to itself a turn, but it's dishing out 2, 3, or 5 damage per activation. So it's really good at clearing the board. And if you can activate it more than once in a turn, you're probably going to take out just about your opponent's entire board. So if anything, you want a Furious Shardback. That's the best combination you can possibly get. But outside of that, I think it's a good ability in terms of like how flexible it is, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
at the higher level, it really ramps pretty quickly, um,
Yeah.
giving +6 attack. You know, 2 activations, and you're way above curve. even one activation, you're above curve, right? Because you'd have 14, 15.
14, yeah.
So it's strong. Like it's very. It does give you quite a bit for the one activation. So.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I don't know if you have a preference, but with the Necreum one, you're doing the 2 damage to yourself as the player, but then
Right.
this one's to the creature. I actually prefer doing it to the creature, and I think it is very strong on its own
Yeah.
outside of the other.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about the Necron ability we're alluding to is bloodletting, and I haven't done the math to see what sort of stat penalty you're taking, and so we'll have to look into that when we get to Necrium.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like Necrium has a similar idea of where you're paying a resource to get attack. So let's talk about quaking.
I've used this one to good effect, actually. I have this with a couple of Thunder Swords, and so quaking is it adds a deploy that does 2 damage to all of your other creatures. I think it stays at 2 all the way through this.
Yeah,
It's painful at level 1 some situations, but as a result, gaining or even stat line. Here, go back to level 1 real quick so we can take a look. I think
yeah. You basically get a +2
gaining stats.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're getting 2 health across the board, an extra 2 health
Yeah.
Above curve.
So I feel like this is worth it. You know, with a good pilot, you'll choose to play this card's ability or not. I'm sure it's unfortunate in some situations, but most of the time I found it's fine, and especially if you see it paired with something like Shardback or Thundersoar. I mean,
Yeah,
Shardback is a common, Thundersoar set too, so you can actually turn this fit.
Yeah, with quaking, yeah, it's interesting, and as you were saying, you know, the 2 damage can be problematic, but it's less relevant the higher level it gets, because 2 damage is not as it scales, right? Like the 2 damage is not as effective to your board later in the game. Like it doesn't hurt you as much. And what you're getting early on is a lot of board control, because an extra 2 health can mean the difference between whether a creature survives 1 turn or 2 turns or 3 turns. So it's a very interesting ability. I like it.
Me too.
All right, let's talk about rolling. So rolling gives the creature mobility 1, and then it reads, when this moves into a lane with an opposing creature, deal 2 damage to that creature. That goes up to 3 damage, and then 5 damage. What is that costing you? It's costing you about 3 in stats at level 1, 4 in stats at level 2, and 6 in stats at level 3. I have not played with this much. It's a rare modifier. I've had people play it against me, and it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
I don't know how good it is, but you're kind of stapling fleet with a little bit of like a damage dealing effect. You're probably losing a little bit more on stats compared to like the fleet where you get increased mobility, but it's kind of not that difficult to play around it if you're paying attention. Like the turn they deploy it, it's gonna probably catch you for like a couple damage, because I have to just put it in an empty lane, then move it over to one of your creatures' lanes. But once it's on the board, you can kind of position your creatures away from it, since it only ever has mobility 1. It can't move that far. But yeah, have you played with or against this much, Nate?
Okay, so yeah, compared to Berserking, where you're getting breakthrough, I think, and you can tell me what you think, I prefer breakthrough in most situations, but the rolling ability is very fun and flavorful. Yeah, what do you think for the stats you're paying here?
Yeah, so like compared to blitzing, yeah, like, well, okay, so breakthrough can be better, but like if you can take out a creature with this, it's a bit better than breakthrough, right? So
Sure.
yeah, it's kind of hard to say. If you have ways to increase the damage, or you have ways to like take advantage of the fact that a creature has decreased health with like Korok's ability, Demolish, then this kind of goes above it. It has, I think, a little bit more survivability than blitzing did. Let's see if we can find blitzing. Let's compare it. Yeah, I mean, it's about the same. So
2 versus 3 or something on the stats,
yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so you're losing a little bit of power, but you're gaining that sort of damage to the opposing creature.
Mhm.
It's kind of one of those things that's like situational and a little bit finicky, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it's situational.
Yeah, in a control deck, I take rolling, but in an aggro deck, I would probably take blitzing. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
what you're looking at. Obviously, you don't get a lot of choice, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just sort of like when you're thinking about the decks you're putting together and whether they're trying to be more controlling or aggro. That's the kind of thing you want to look at, right? What are your modifiers and how aggressive are your creatures versus how controlling are they? Let's got 2 more of these to talk about. Let's talk about Solemn. So Solemn reads, deploy if this has no adjacent creatures, give it +2/+2. That goes up to 3/3 and then 5/5. In terms of the penalty you're taking, you're looking at a -2, -3, and -5 penalty. But you're actually above curve if you can beat the solemn condition, right, of having nothing adjacent. And the penalty you're actually taking is more towards the attack side than the health side usually, especially at level 1. So it's very easy in the first cycle to have a position something like this in an open lane, not adjacent to anything. That said, you are it is a little bit restrictive in that you don't always get, if you want to catch something with that card, you're not always going to have that luxury to get the bonus and catch a creature in the same time. But you're not taking a huge stat penalty on it. So I think it's like a good sort of above curve modifier. Like it's not that hard to trigger it. And get especially if you're the aggressor, it gives you a lot of stats to work with. Like a 16/16,
Yeah.
32 points of stats versus 27. That's like a pretty significant jump.
I was gonna say I agree with everything you say. And just the 2 points. I think that it is better than most of the other modifiers, especially on cards like Shardback, where it enables them to do more with their health. And then it's also better than like Forsaken, because Forsaken, the set 1 Necrium ability, was a opposing creature. So this, in my practical experience, it's been much easier to trigger this and use it effectively than something like Forsaken. So I don't think you're taking a lot of downside for what is a pretty good upside.
Yeah, you just if you do have creatures with Solemn in your deck, you just want to pay attention to where you're putting your creatures, and try and keep lane 2 and 4 open, because that'll give you the most flexibility in getting a Solemn creature and without something adjacent to it. But yeah, I think it's strong in terms of just like raw stats and just getting us a good survivable creature and being able to push a lot of damage or trade up. So let's move on to the last Forge modifier. What do we got here?
So Windy, I just recently got a Windy deck, Windy Sentinel deck.
Nice.
This is a rare modifier, so it is hard to get. I wasn't lucky enough to pull a Windy creature of substance until
I don't have any yet.
Yeah, it seems pretty rare. And then there are some situations where this attribute are especially impactful. So what Windy does, you take a 2 health penalty, but in return, on deploy, the creature gets to do 1 damage to an opposing creature, or to any creature, if that matters, for each spell in your banish pile. So the and that stays, I think, at 1 all the way up to level 3. But
actually, it goes up to
this
2 at level 3.
Wow, it does go up to level 2. So that's really good at level 3 then, because you're accumulating spells throughout the game also. So there's a kind of doubling of a scaled ability at level 3. Pretty fantastic. I love this ability. That's why I went out and found a card, in particular, the Windy Sentinel, which is a double spells matter kind of benefit and removal. So much like the Furious Shardback, this thing can, in the right situations, create incredible value, and it just adds removal to any creature. Sure, it's a little contingent on spell plays, but
let me bring up the
adding removal
real quick while you're...
Sure. Adding removal, always great.
Yeah, I totally agree. If your deck is wanting to play spells and you have a high spell density, this is definitely a modifier that you want. Again, with the Windy Sentinel, you get to kind of double dip on it. There's 2 things that we should kind of note about this. One is that it's not an optional ability.
Mm.
So if they don't have a
Mm.
creature, you probably do not want to play this,
Good
because
point.
you are going to nuke your own creature. It's not a May.
Mm.
The other thing to consider is also how many of the spells in your deck are exalts and exalts that are going to stick around that don't self-destruct, because that's actually going to kind of work against these abilities that care about how much are in your banish pile. You know, if you have a bunch of I don't know, what's one that sticks out?
Glowhive Nurseries
Glowhive
or yeah.
Nursery or Runescarred Pit, which we'll talk about in
Sure, but
the upcoming episodes. They just, you deploy them and they stay out, so that doesn't help these, even if you have a high spell density deck. So if you're trying to capitalize on Windy, make sure you're paying attention to not just to your spells, but your exalts, and making sure you take that into the calculus.
yeah.
Cool. So yeah, that's our last Forge modifier. So we just got a couple more things to go through, which is our spells and our soul binds. So let's talk about our first spell. Elementalist Ritual.
Starting strong. Starting strong.
Yeah, I'm just going alphabetically. So this one's near and dear to my heart, so I think I'm gonna read this. So Elementalist Ritual reads, choose one. If you have an elemental in play, choose two instead. So here's our elemental synergy card. The first ability is non-combat damage you deal this turn is increased by 2. The second ability is deal 3 to a creature or player, and then the third ability is do 2 damage to all non-elemental creatures. The way that scales is it goes up to 3/5/3 at level 2, and then 4/7/4 at level 3. This card is fantastic if you can reliably have an elemental in play. At a baseline, you know, increasing non-combat damage by 2 and doing 3 to something, it's basically like a lightning spark. You just deal 5 to something. But you have the added flexibility of being able to, maybe you want to increase all non-combat damage by 2 and do 2 to all non-elementals. Now you're doing like a one-sided firestorm. If your opponent's playing Tempys, you're not hitting their elementals, but still. This card has a lot of flexibility, and this non-combat damage increase ability is very unique, and just asking to be abused.
Mm-hmm.
It affects things like Dark Heart Sorcerer's proc. The thing about that too is that when you play this spell into a Dark Heart Sorcerer, the spell resolves first before the Dark Heart Sorcerer ability, so it will drain the extra 2 combat damage if you choose that mode. Shamblers, there's a lot of things you can do with this extra 2 damage, but every time I've played this and I've had an elemental in play, it's been fantastic. What are your thoughts, Nate?
Yeah, and even at its baseline, like I've had decks that have 2 elementals in them, or maybe even a lightning tamer that pulls in a spell sprite that's an elemental. I still like seeing this card. It's great, like hands down, one of the best spells in set 2. And you kind of mentioned earlier about Sunder having the ability to summon elementals on command. This is another card that just loves that. So this and Mystical Teacher benefit. And then the cool thing about this is it affects like Forgeborn abilities too. So another one of Sunder's abilities is to damage the entire board for like 4, 5, 6 damage. I've used that really effectively with this card as well by pumping non-combat. It is crazy the kind of upside, the ceiling that this card has, and even at its worst, it's a weaker lightning bolt or lightning spark. Even if you just did 3 damage to something instead of 5, that's the floor for this card.
Yeah, like the fail case on this card has a pretty high floor, right? Yeah. And we see all the time, spells that will do just 3 damage to a creature and some other minor benefit at level 1. This is not a minor benefit if you can meet the condition. So it's definitely serviceable without an elemental in play, but it can do some pretty game-breaking stuff when you have an elemental in play, and it feels especially one-sided because you have so much control over how you combine the 2 abilities, or the 3 abilities, right? So definitely high on my list of cards.
If anyone listening is looking through their collection and sees one of these, and you see elemental count above 2, like once you start getting that range, you should definitely play test that deck and see what's possible with it, because you might find some really strong combinations.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
All right, what do we got next? Looks like we've got a complex one. Do you want to talk about Fireheart Idol?
This one's great. Yeah, I've actually really grown to love this card. When I first saw it, I was like, this is a very weird tempo hit. What it is, Fireheart Idol is an Exalt. So at level 1, you play it in a lane, and then nothing happens. You then have to wait and build up charges on it. So the text reads, when you play a creature in this lane or play another spell, put a counter on this card. And then if there's 4 or more counters, then you have the option of destroying the card to do 6 damage to a creature, any creature, and a player. So you're taking a tempo hit to put this in a lane. In set 2, there's no benefit to having an Exalt in there for the most part, so it's just hanging out, doing its thing. But surprise, this is essentially a trap card of sorts, where you're setting it up for later and able to leverage it in the future, with some downside up front.
Yeah.
The text, the only other thing about the text is it's 4 counters at level 1, 3 counters at level 2, and 2 counters at level 3. And the damage scales pretty nicely, 6, 7, 8. So across the 3 cards, it's quite a bit of damage that's being put out. And the fact that it gets easier to play at levels 2 and 3 is, I guess, obvious, but also pretty dangerous, pretty deadly when you get to level 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean the text on it is sometimes, once you've parsed what it does, it's very, like you said, it's very strong. It's kind of like a delayed removal spell plus face damage to your opponent. That's the big thing. It's not just the creature; it's also the player. And a lot of people misread that the first time they look at this card and thinking they have to do one or the other, but it's both. 2 things to note about this card. One is that you have to when you trigger it, you get the counter, and if you meet the condition, you may destroy it. But you have to do it as part of the triggered ability. So say you play a spell, you get 4 counters on it, you can, then and there, you can destroy it and do 6 damage to a creature and a player. If you choose not to, it sticks around, but you have to play another spell or put a creature in that lane before you can try and trigger it again. There are going to be situations where there's nothing on their side of the board that you want to kill, and you've already got 4 counters on it. Maybe you get to 5 or 6 counters before you find something you want to kill. But again, you can't just like say, oh, I'm just going to pop it now. You have to actually have a spell or a creature play to trigger it, so you want to be careful with that. But that also adds to the flexibility of it, right? You don't have to destroy it as soon as it reaches the counters. It just says 4 or more, or 2 or more, as it grows. So having that ability to like control when it happens, you'd be surprised how good that is. You're taking that sort of tempo, like Nate said, you're taking a tempo hit early on because it doesn't do anything when you first play it. But the fact that it almost becomes like sort of a pseudo Forgeborn ability where you get to just kind of pop it when you need it, becomes really, really good. Yeah.
2 other notes on this one. I found it's really effective with Flame Jet. So if you get a deck with this and Flame Jet, all of a sudden the incidental damage over cycles 1 and 2 can really, to your opponent, goes through the roof. Like if you're triggering the level 1 and 2 of Fireheart by the end of cycle 2, it's 13 damage to the player. That's in addition to what you're doing to their board, plus 2 Flame Jets. You're looking at more than half their health total gone between Flame Jet and Fireheart by the end of cycle 2 if you're able to draw them. And that can really slow some heal decks down and break thresholds. So
and the Flame Jet too you can do it as a free play, so you get that extra counter pretty quickly.
Yeah, really good pairing. And then just a funny side note, I mean, it is a tempo hit, like I said, with level 1, but it's not Frostalk. It doesn't intentionally hurt you. So
exactly.
I think I'm okay with this it
does not hurt you. It just doesn't do anything yet. But not in the way that Frostalk does nothing.
Right.
Awesome. So let's look at Flame Sculptor's Seal. So this is an Exalt. This is sort of a mage synergy card. So it says deploy, deal 3 damage to an enemy creature. Then when you play a mage in this lane, deal 3 damage to an enemy creature, and then destroy this. That's not a May, but you do have control over whether you put the mage in that lane or not. That damage goes up to 5 and 5, and then 7 and 7 at level 3. what's your? I want to get your take on this one,
Sure.
Nate.
I'll concisely say I think it's a little weak. I think this card has a little too much contingency and the damage is a little low. Mages are not my favorite things to be playing in set 2
Mm-hmm.
Tempys. I think elementals are. So and then yeah, we lost some mage synergy in set 2, right? There's no lightning brands flying
Right.
around. So not my favorite card, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are 12 Tempest mages in battle. Um, so it's not. It is a supported creature type, for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
But like Nate's saying, I agree. It's underwhelming as far as what it does. The fact that you get to split up the damage is nice, but I'd rather have something like a Conflagrate or something like that that really scales.
Hmm.
Because it kind of feels like it's not really giving you an action's worth of value, even when you combine both halves of it. Like, at most, you're probably finishing off a creature, which means you've already invested an action probably in weakening that creature to begin with. So, it definitely gets more impactful at the higher levels, but it's very finicky, and it just doesn't feel like it does enough at the earlier at the it doesn't do enough damage.
Hmm.
Uh,
There's a few small things they could have changed, I think. So maybe if it was 4 and 4, and so adding 1 point of damage, that actually might be enough to make this a little bit more interesting. And then
yeah,
if it allowed you to hit your own creatures situationally, things like Shardback, maybe it would benefit, or Thundersaurs. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's worded in a way you can't do that with the card today. So
yeah. I can see why they chose enemy, just so that you're not forced to hurt your own guy. But
mm,
if they have an empty board, and you can still play it for other reasons. But I think
mhm,
it would have been better just to have that flexibility.
mhm.
So especially since you have a lot of control over it. So yeah, not that exciting.
Not bad, but yeah, not exciting.
So
Agree.
let's move on to lightning charge.
I love this card.
What does this card do?
This card is fantastic. So at level 1, it gives a level 1 creature +5 attack and gives it aggressive this turn. Um, and then this goes up quite a bit at levels 2 and 3. So at level 2, it's +7 attack and aggressive to 2 different creatures. So you're going from 5 stats to 14. And at level 3, it's 9 to all your creatures, and they all get aggressive. This card basically takes one of Korok's best Forge-Worn abilities and gives you a chance to utilize it in any Tempys deck. There's a lot of free spell options too that still exist both in your Forged Half and then your Tempys deck, that a lot of times this makes a lot of sense to play. I love this card. I think it's really great, and I've had a lot of fun mixing it with things like a Shadow Strength in Necreum, where all of a sudden you've buffed a lot of attack, the Shadow Strength is free, and you're coming right at their face when they weren't expecting it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting that the first level is level gated, but then the next two are not.
Hmm. That's a good
So
point.
I think the reason they did that is so that you can't just like leave it under leveled and get this like huge aggressive play on level, in cycle 3, like on just one big breakthrough creature like Krogius. Right, so like you do have to put a little bit of work into it, and only getting 5 attack is not a, I mean it's a very front loaded and big, to be able to start hitting your opponent for 5, but it's not like necessarily an action's worth of attack. um so level 1 is definitely,
Yeah.
it can be good, don't get me wrong, but once you get to level 2 and 3, and this tends to be a lot of like how Tempe spells work, is that the second and third levels tend to be really off the charts. But it's also kind of hard to fully utilize the third level because it's hard to get out a bunch of creatures and play this at the same time, right? So you're not going to be like getting through with 5 creatures that have all 9
Yeah.
plus attack, right? Unless you
Yeah.
like Army of the Damned or something. So it does, but you're going to be trading all those creatures for sure if you have a board at that point. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely.
5 lanes, 9 attack though. I mean, that's 40 damage. I can't think of another spell that gives that kind of
Yeah,
stat.
45 extra
So
attack. Yeah,
that's incredible, right?
yeah, especially if you
Yeah.
have a deck that has a lot of like high toughness creatures that can survive multiple turns.
Yeah. Or breakthrough. Yep. So Yeah, I agree with everything you said for sure.
Yeah, speaking of high attack, let's talk about Spirit Golem Conclave. So here we have another Exalt. It reads, deploy, give a creature +3 attack, and then it has the text, when one of your creatures enters this lane, give it 3 attack. So notably, that does not say when you play a creature in the lane, it says when it enters the lane. So mobility works really well with this card. You can move creatures in and out, give that extra 3 attack, and it scales pretty big. So it goes from 3 to 8 to 15 attack on deploy and when they move in. Now, this is one of the flavors of Exalts that destroy the earlier versions, so you can't have a bunch of Spirit Golem Conclaves all out on the board at the same time, sort of a betrayer. But, you know, you can easily get 30 points worth of stats in just one play. Or you know, in one turn cycle, rather. Play this, give something on the board 15, then play something in the lane with it, give it another 15. Or put it, give something 15 attack, mobility it in, give another 15. This will play very nicely with blitzing, for sure. Yeah, I like this card a lot. And the nice thing is it sticks around. It doesn't self-destruct like some of them, some of the Exalts. So it accrues. It's a big return on investment, even at level 1. Like, even if you just only are able to ever get out the level 1 ability, having that extra 3 attack really changes the math. And really makes that a very deadly lane.
Yeah, I've used this card best when it's early in cycle 1 that I get this out because it accrues benefit, to your point. And there's a lot of creatures that can move in and out of lanes in other factions as well. We saw Cacklebones. I've used Cacklebones pretty well with this because it's hungering for some attack. And in Aloyan, you have, you know, Glitch Scout and a couple others that really need a little more attack. This card pairs really well into that. And the last thought is, I really hope Spirit Golems become a thing in the future. This is the first time we're seeing cool golems. The artwork is really cool here too. You know, a bunch of rowdy dwarves being chased. It's pretty cool. Love it.
Yeah. And, like, you know, the other thing to the point of getting the value too, it's your opponent can't ignore this lane when you have a creature in it, right? And if your creature trades off, you just put a new creature in that lane. So, like, some Exalts, you put them out there and they do have some value, but sometimes your opponent can just kind of ignore that lane. This one you can't. You have to block it, or you have to destroy the creature that's in it, or else it's just going to run you over. So it's a very awesome common forge.
Do you think in the removal? Do you think? Sorry to interrupt, but do you think in the future we'll see Exalt removal, and that would change the value of this card?
Yeah, I mean, set 3, there's a very good chance that it will have at least some amount of Exalt removal. Will that change the value of this card? A little, maybe, but presumably there's going to be a cost associated with that removal, and you will have already gotten value out of it by that point. So, even if you only get, like, 6 attack or 9 attack out of the first level, it's still an action's worth of value, in my opinion. So, yeah, for sure. Let's move on to Stampede.
So this one, is a spell, just a regular spell that says you can do 2 damage to a creature. This damage ignores armor, and then you can repeat that same dealing damage for each dinosaur you have in play when the spell is played. The damage ramps up to 4 and then 7 damage per instance as you get to level 3 of the card. So some dino synergy. We had Chant of Umbrock in set 1. We get Stampede in set 2. This card I was not impressed with at first sight. I avoided playing it, but have found some pretty good uses for it, and it doesn't have that low of a floor, but it also doesn't have that high of a ceiling. So I think I'm somewhere in the middle on this card. I like seeing spells that affect the board immediately, and the ability to go through armor is, like, situationally cool, but as we talked about in the Loyan episode, armor is not the biggest threat in general right now. Maybe that changes in the future, but what do you think, Ben?
Yeah, it's an interesting card. It really doesn't shine unless you have at least 1 dinosaur in play. Like, if you have 1 dinosaur in play, it can do work, especially at the 2nd level. The big thing is that you can split where that damage goes. It doesn't have to all be to the same creature. So that flexibility is nice. One thing I will say is that there are only 6 Tempys dinosaurs in Battle for Whitefang Pass. So it's very hard to get a deck that's going to have a high density of dinosaurs for this to go with. So
Yeah.
more times than not, it's not going to give you a ton of value. It's kind of making a promise that it can't really deliver on, just because there aren't enough dinosaurs in Tempys to get a high enough density in your deck. You know, if you roll a deck that has like 3 or 4 dinosaurs in it natively, that can be really good. But as we talked about in the past, if you have a card that cares about a certain thing, you want to have at least 7 or 8 of that thing in your deck, to reliably be able to benefit. And you're kind of only having 6 dinosaurs in the set in Tempys puts you at a pretty high disadvantage for this card. So it's hard. You know, you have to have a really high density for it to be valuable.
We'll probably talk about it in the Utera episode, but where in set 1, the Dino synergy, the Dino strength was a good mix, and fairly evenly split in my mind between Utera and Tempys. And I feel like in set 2, Utera really got the heavy end of the Dino stick.
For
So
sure.
a lot of the things
Yeah.
you'll see in Utera are much better, and it's going to be rare to see a strong Dino deck, I think, in set 2, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And this
Yeah.
card is still playable.
Yeah. And like I picked up a deck with a Utera deck with a Betrayer Stompede just to try and see if I can make
Oh,
that
cool.
work. So we'll see. But yeah, you definitely have to pair this with Utera. There's just no other way to get the value that you need out of it, just because of how few dinosaurs there are in set 2 Tempys.
Agreed.
But you know what? There's a lot of elementals.
Here we go.
Do you want to talk about the Thunder Crash field?
Sure. This is a very, very cool card, a cool mechanic that they added to set 2. So Thunder Crash Field is an Exalt, and on deploy, you can put a spell sprite into that lane. And then the permanent text on the card reads, when one of your creatures in this lane gains attack, deal 2 damage to the enemy player directly. And this thing isn't going anywhere. It doesn't have a replace the level 1, replace the level 2 when the next level is played. So these are permanent, affecting the board. And even after your spell sprite might die, anything that gains attack in this lane is going to deal damage to the enemy player. It's 2 every time. The only other kicker is at level 3, the Thunder Crash Field reads, put a Spell Swarm minion, so the bigger version of the sprite, into each Thunder Crash Field lane. So you're getting a lot of value from the level 3 Thunder Crash in terms of board presence. And then you're setting up a really dangerous situation at a dangerous point in most games, which is cycle 3. Yeah, I love this card. We've seen some really incredible decks use this, but I've encountered a lot of decks that try to use this, and it isn't that valuable. So
Right.
what's your experience been, Ben? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a good deck with one of these in it, so I have not been able to really utilize it that much. I have seen it put to good use with Utera using cards like Transcendent Biologist and Lycian Rain. Because with like Lycian Rain, you pump the spell sprite from the spell play and from the minion buff that the Lycian Rain gives. So you're doing like 4 damage just from that card. And like you said, once you have all 3 of them out, you get those spell swarms and then just one spell play like a flame jet, and now you're dealing the flame jet damage plus an extra 6. Elementalist Ritual goes nuts with this because you increase that non-combat damage, right? With your spell sprites, and they just do a ton of damage that way. But it's slow. All you get out of it is a dinky little spell sprite when you first play it. So you have to be careful that you aren't going to fall too far behind on board when you first play this card. But if you can have a lot of ways in your deck to increase your attack on creatures, not just through the spell sprites, but through other, you need other means of increasing attack in your deck. Because if all you're doing is relying on the spell sprites, you're not going to have bodies that are big enough to either stay on the board or to trade with your opponent's creatures. So that's just something you have to be like aware of when you're trying to build around this card.
Yeah, I had two more thoughts. So if you're interested in this card and you want to try and build a deck around it, I think two things. One that's been said is that you need help, whether it be through your partner fuse deck with like a biologist or something that would allow Lycian Rain, something that pumps minions, and then your goal is to put minions in these Thunder Crash lanes, but also within the Tempys. So
Hmm.
you're looking for maybe a lightning tamer that could put two bodies into two separate lanes, because a lot of times in practical play your opponent's gonna see this threat and remove it or address it quickly, right? The creature going into these lanes is a sprite. It's a 1/4. It's not exactly difficult to outvalue those in a combat situation, and then all of a sudden you're down board presence. So I think in practical experience, oh, and the other thing is too, you can't skip. So you might be tempted like, hey, I'm going to skip right to that level 3 version. Well, then you've cut all your value out too. So this is one that you really should be playing every level of to get the
Hmm.
value at level 3, but it also is pretty weak at level 1 compared to your other alternatives. So
Yeah, it definitely benefits from having like free spell plays in your deck, because then you're not
yeah.
losing tempo. You just use that free spell play to get this out and accrue value that way.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think that kind of covers Thunder Crash Field. And there's a lot of like opportunity to be creative with it, but you need to have support for it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, still a good card.
yeah, let's talk about Warbringer Ritual. So Warbringer Ritual at level 1 reads, you may play a spell sprite minion. So speaking of, and that's it. That's all it says. So speaking of not impacting the board, does not do much. But when you get to level 2, it does a lot. So at level 2, you may play up to 2 spell sprite minions. And then you get to play a free spell. And that is not level gated. And then at level
Mhm.
3, you get a spell swarm, 1 spell swarm, and you get another free spell. This, unlike Thunder Crash Field, is a card you want to try and skip the first level if you can, through an upgrade, either Aloyan or Necrium. Just get past it and just go straight to where you can get the free play spells. But it's pretty straightforward. You get a couple elementals, spell sprites, and you get to play a free spell, and then you get get those instantly buff them. I think this card's great. It's just you have to be aware of the little bit of tempo hit you're going to take if you have to play the first level and you have no real reliable way of upgrading. And it reminds me a lot of the Aloyan card Warmonger mod from Alpha, where it kind of does the same thing but with creatures instead of spells, right? You get to play your Gizmo and then you get to play a free creature at level 2 and 3. So, what are your thoughts on this one, Nate?
Yeah, which one do you think's stronger? I was actually just going to ask you about that.
Between
I
Warmonger
think
mod and Ritual?
Yeah, because a creature could be argued to be more valuable as opposed to spell, but when you look at level 2 of Warbringer Ritual, you're getting, 2/8 worth of stats that's gonna only grow with your next spell play, which you're getting for free. So I think I prefer Warbringer, but how about you?
I think I like Warbringer Ritual 2. I actually think level 2 is stronger than level 3 on this card. I'd rather have the 2 spell sprites and having them instantly be 3/4s than having a single spell swarm and having it be like a 6/9.
Yeah.
Because you get to kind of like cover a couple lanes and push damage through from 2 lanes, not just one, or make 2 blocks. And the Gizmo, it's really more of like a buff than it is a creature, right? Like you're usually just
Yeah.
making that you're basically just playing a creature and giving it a buff. So it's basically like a free +2/+2 or +6/+6 on
Yeah.
the Warmonger mod. So I think I like the Ritual better just because there's more, you can do more interesting things with it, and it plays more nicely with what Tempys is trying to do, especially with the spell heavy decks.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more synergistic, I feel like, than the Warmonger mod, but they're in different factions, so they're trying to do 2 different things.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like this card. I think if you see your opponent has this card in Flame Jet with their Thunder Crash fields, watch out, because
Yeah,
it might start slow, but once they start ramping those cards up to level 2, it's going to be a lot of
yeah,
pain coming your way very
yeah. Throwing
quickly.
these guys into their Thunder Crash fields is just nuts.
Yeah.
So I think that was our last spell. So we just have the 5 soul binds to talk about. So let's start off with Ator, the Thunder Titan. Do you want to talk about Ator? I don't actually have one of these yet.
Okay, yeah, I was lucky enough to get a pretty good Ator, and he was one of the spoiled artworks. So I wondered what he was going to be coming into set two, and he did not disappoint. So he's a 4/6 warrior, so he's taking a 2-stat penalty on attack to play Cloud Rift, which is definitely game changing in a lot of ways. The Cloud Rift is a soulbind, so it says so it's an exalt spell. So when it's first played, it counts as a spell play as well, which does benefit some decks quite a bit. And then it says when one of your creatures in this lane damages the enemy player, transform Cloud Rift, and then doing so, it becomes Sky Conduit, and that reads when one of your creatures in this lane is damages the enemy player, deal that much damage to an enemy creature as well. So it's sort of a chain lightning sort of effect. This one is player damage is converted into creature damage. There's a similar effect in another soulbind we'll get to, but this is a fantastic card. It really changes the board, and that was a big selling point of set two, right? Was that these exalts were going to change the board, and some do outside of soulbinds, but here with Ator, we're starting to see some that just absolutely change the board. And when your opponent has this out, when you have this out, you should really try and enable it, and then always every turn be looking for ways to leverage this card.
Yeah, yeah. Just a note with Ator, the first level just lets you play the Cloud Rift, but as he goes up in level, you can move an Exalt to another lane. So that's actually also another pretty unique thing. That level 2, it's a deploy ability, but at level 3, it's an activate where you can move Exalts around. And I think he's the only one card right now that can do anything like that. So that's also really, really cool. There's a lot of ways to synergize with the Sky Conduit. There's a couple different routes you can go. You can go with Breakthrough, Stealth. You can do Darkheart Sorcerer or Shambling Shenanigans. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with it.
Yeah.
So it might be worth talking about this. So by the time this episode comes out, there has been a change to the way that transforming works in SolForge Fusion. Prior to the rules change, playing or transforming a card was considered playing the card. Now it's no longer considered a card play. So previously you could play a Darkheart Sorcerer, play Ator, you get the spell play, and you play Cloud Rift, right? And then that'll trigger the Darkheart. It will flip Cloud Rift because it was played, but when you turn it into the Sky Conduit, it doesn't see it as a new spell. So you won't trigger Darkheart again with it. So if you're familiar with that interaction, interaction has recently changed. Still a pretty good card. You just don't get that sort of like extra benefit when you do the flip. So this is something to be aware of with the new way that the card works.
Yeah, good to call it. It affects some other soulbinds. We'll see.
Yeah, but yeah, pretty straightforward. It's one of those cards that will definitely change the way your opponent plays just from it being on the field. They can't ignore the creature in that lane because they're gonna basically turns everything into a Windspark Elemental in that lane. Just, if it hits you, then, or you can put a Windspark Elemental in that lane and double dip.
Double dip.
Yeah.
One other thing too, I think in a Loyan episode we talked about how some soulbinds are pretty lackluster, and we're gonna get into the other Tempys, but this one's phenomenal in my opinion, and probably top 3 or even 1 or 2 of the Tempys ones. So yeah,
for sure.
really strong, really game changing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, let's talk about Frostmane Breath. So Frostmane Breath is the next soulbind. It's a spell. At level 1, it says play Frostmane Egg. Okay. At level 2, it says play Frostmane Egg and then deal 6 damage to an enemy creature. This turn it gets Defender. So you can do a little bit of damage to a creature and push it back. And then at level 3, it says play Frostmane Dragon. Deal 8 damage to an enemy creature and give it Defender. So what is an egg, you say? The Frostmane Egg is a 0/10 Defender. And it says at the end of the deck cycle, transform this. So it's kind of does something kind of like what Everflame Phoenix did, where If you can get it to survive till the end of the cycle, it's going to flip. And it will become the Frostmane Dragon, which is a 9/9 with mobility X. And X is equal to the current level of your Forgeborn. So the dragon doesn't get any bigger, but it gets more maneuverable. I'm going to be honest, this card is not that exciting. You have the earliest you can get the Frostmane Dragon out is cycle 2, because you have to wait for the egg to flip, and that's assuming you can get the egg to survive till the end of the cycle. And then you just have a creature that's like on curve with a little bit of mobility, and that kind of gets weaker as the game goes on. I have not been super impressed with it. It's cool that it's a dragon, because we don't have that many dragons. And we talked about Aloyan last episode, and the scale dragons that care about having dragons next to them. So this is a really good one if you're doing that, because you can, he's got mobility. You can move next to your rage scale or your aether scale dragon and proc it that way. But you're taking a big tempo hit, right, just to play this 0/10 egg. And the damage that it deals at levels 2 and 3 just is not that much. So I don't know. What's your opinion of this? Have you played with it much? I played with it a little bit.
I have.
When it first came out.
I have, and I have got a deck that's solid with this, but I think it does, like we've talked about a few times, it lends itself to a control strategy, which I don't prefer playing. So yeah, and I think you've sent the one other point is that I found levels 2 and 3 the give that creature defender has had surprising value.
Okay.
So I think I've hit huge targets before that would have hit me for 20 plus, and all of a sudden they're at least dealt with for a turn and pushed back and neutralized.
Yeah, it's kind of like a nap time, but not, but gives you something besides just a little bit of life, right? You get the body.
Yeah, if you add the 9/9 of the Frostmane Dragon to the benefit of the spell, it gets a little bit more understandable. But yeah, it's not as certain of a game-changing card like Nova Elementalist or Ator or some of these other soulbinds. So
yeah, it feels like a card that you don't really build your deck around, but it's nice to have as an incidental.
Yeah, I'd like to see more dragon synergy. It was cool to see that pop up in Aloyan, and maybe in the future dragons get their day, and
right.
And this card will come back into favor.
Yeah, based on some of the storyline stuff that was going on, at least at Fuse Fest, there was some hinting that dragons may be important soon.
Great.
All right, we just got a couple more soulbinds to go. Let's talk about Goliath the Fearless. You want to take this one, Nate?
Sure. Goliath is a warrior. He's kind of the quintessential warrior soulbind. He's a 6/6, so he's taking no loss in stats. And he also allows you to play Rage Idol, which and move an enemy creature to Goliath's lane. So really cool. It allows you to manipulate the board. Rage Idol is an Exalt that you can play. And it says when an enemy creature is destroyed in this lane, deal 2 damage to the enemy player. And this actually goes up quite a bit in the when the level 3 version of Rage Idol is played, and it's going to do 5 damage to the creature when it enters, and then when the creature dies, it does 5 damage to the enemy player. So it's an instant assertion of dominance on a lane once this comes out. So anything your opponent puts there has to survive that initial 5 damage to even have a chance to play there. So really cool. I think thematically it's really cool, and you don't take any real loss in stats. You still have a pretty good level 1 creature here that can do a lot of cool things. Yeah, I found it to be pretty effective. Yeah, what do you think, Ben?
Yeah, level 1 definitely strong. Being able to taunt something to his lane is pretty cool, and getting the Rage Idol, you don't have to put it in his lane necessarily, but often you will be putting the Rage Idol in that lane. At level 2, he again has that sort of taunting, move a creature to his lane. He loses a little bit. His stats start to fall off as he gets higher in level. He's just an 8/8 at level 2 and a 9/9 at level 3, so he's definitely under curve. And the other thing is that you can't transform Rage Idol until you play the 3rd level of him. So the earliest you're going to see that Rage of Kadras is level 3. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's not a game-breaking thing, but you can definitely do some fun stuff with him, especially if you have other ways of manipulating board position that Aloyan can often do, and like pushing things into the Kadros lane can be very punishing because you're going to be dealing a lot of damage to your opponent and just knocking their creatures out pretty easily. Okay, yeah, so yeah, interesting. It's not like the strongest Soulbind, but it's and I don't know that you can really build a deck around it, but
yeah,
you'll do a little bit of incidental damage over time as creatures are dying in that lane.
I like these Soulbinds that put cool exalts in. It really makes the opponent think or double think a lot of their plays. So if nothing else, there's a psychological benefit to having Rage Idol or Kadros sitting out on the board.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we just got 2 more to talk about, it looks like. So we've got Lightning Ritual. So I'll go ahead and talk about this one. This is another spell. It reads, at level 1, deal 5 damage to an enemy creature and then play Lightning Runes. And what is Lightning Runes, you ask? It's an exalt. It says, when you deal non-combat damage to an enemy creature in this lane, transform this. What do you transform it into? Harbinger Staff. When you deal non-combat damage to an enemy creature in this lane, you may deal that much damage to another creature. So you basically put a do not put your creature in this lane sign down. But that may not always be possible because at level 2, Lightning Ritual reads, move an enemy creature up to 1 lane and then deal 6 damage to it. And then at level 3 can move an enemy creature up to 2 lanes and deal 7 damage to it. So Lightning Ritual is not a card that you can easily build a deck around. It's a cool incidental card, and the fact that it kind of like reinforces itself, where you can like move the enemy creatures into that lane, and then deal damage to it is pretty cool. Based on like the amount you can move it, you can only move it 1 or 2 lanes. You're most likely going to want to put this in the Exalt in lane 3 to have the most benefit over the game. But yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's interesting. It's not like game breaking. It's very easy to play around. Like, I've tried some decks with it, and I found like if you pair it with like a Loyan and you have like some taunting creatures and like specimens or Allomancers where you can like do damage directly to the creature, like it only procs off of non-combat damage, so you have to have a lot of sources of non-combat damage to make it really work. Otherwise it doesn't. It's just sort of like an underleveled Lightning Spark. Like it does 5 damage at level 1, which is fine, but it doesn't scale up unless you can like manage to get that creature into the Lightning Runes lane. Have you played with it much, Nate?
Yeah, I actually tried to build a deck around this. It's fun. I did the same thing, taunting Allomancer to just try and reap some benefit. It's fun, but it does what you said at the very beginning. It puts up a big sign that says, do not put your creature in this lane. And skilled opponents will not put creatures in this lane. So then you really need something. And then you're trying to, at that point, you're really going a long way for a gimmick, right? You're really trying to, if you're choosing a taunting creature or you're choosing to play a Loyan, just to have this happen and you don't draw it, you're really going a lot in terms of building a deck to meet sort of very contingent requirement. The only other thing I've seen effective with this, and you should be aware of, is if you see lightning runes with a lightning charge, either on a Korok or as a spell, that can really give you some cool combo opportunities because, like we said, the opponent's not going to put creatures in this lane a lot of times, which frees up a lot of surprise damage opportunities off Forge. So,
yeah, exactly.
Try for that.
Yeah, so you just gotta pay attention to how you build your deck and how you play it out. But yeah, it's definitely kind of a neat card, but I wouldn't say it's like particularly easy to build a deck around it. So, all right, let's come to our final Soulbind, the big, the bad, the Nova Elementalist. You want to talk about this, Nate?
Here it is. Yeah, this is the one that I think most people would say defines Tempys set to Soulbinds. So Nova Elementalist is a mage. It's a 4/5, and it says on deploy, play Rumble Spark Energy, which is, surprise, an exalt that goes down in a lane. And it says your creatures in this lane are also elementals. And then when one of your elementals deals damage, the enemy player transform this and put into one of your empty lanes the flip side of the card, which is Rumble Spark Embodiment. This is a 4/8 elemental that says when you play a spell, give it +4 attack. And the kicker at the bottom, it says if this would be destroyed, transform it and put it into one of your lanes without an exalt. And that undying nature of this card has made it very popular in competitive circles, and it makes it very easy to get value out of.
Hmm.
And actually led to some of the changes Ben referenced earlier about transform not counting as an additional card play because of some of the interactions. Nova Elementalist, should be noted, does also get stronger itself, so it's not like Goliath where it kind of falls off. I actually really think this card gets a lot of value out of levels 2 and 3 as well. So at
Hmm.
level 2, it's a 4/8, and it can activate to do 2 damage to an enemy creature for each elemental you have in play. And at level 3, it's 5. Yeah, it's a lot of damage.
Mm.
So it's a 4/12 that does 5 damage to an enemy creature for each elemental you have in play. So the card itself is not a slouch. The Soulbind is arguably the best Soulbind in set 2. So, and you've got a mage here, you've got an elemental that it brings to the party, and we've talked about a lot of the elemental synergies. There's probably not enough good things. There's probably infinite good things we could say
Yeah.
about Nova Elementalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, how's your experience with it been? Ben?
Yeah. I mean, same as most. Uh, it's a very competitive card. If this is the first time you're hearing about it from this podcast, the big thing that you people are pairing this with is Darkheart Sorcerer, because anytime you play a spell, if the Rumble Spark energy is in the Darkheart Sorcerer lane, it'll instantly flip. And if you have a Darkheart Sorcerer and you play Nova Elementalist, you get the Exalt, it triggers the Darkheart, and it instantly flips. So you get a 4/5 and a 4/8 on turn 1, possibly. Uh, Prior to the rules change, since it was considered playing a card when you transform, you'd be able to put the Rumble Spark energy back in the Darkheart lane and instantly trigger the Darkheart and then replay it. Now they've changed that, so now you're gonna have to play another spell to trigger the Darkheart to trigger it again. So it's a little less oppressive, but it's still pretty oppressive to have this 4/8 creature that keeps coming back over and over again for doing things you already want to do. So it's very potent with Necrium, with things like Darkheart Sorcerer, Shambler, Vampiric creatures, just because it's so good. Necrium's just so good at putting this this sort of like bleed damage to your opponent, and thus proccing the Rumble Spark energy. So that's kind of like the favored faction to be pairing with. But I'm hopeful to see like if this rules change where you can't instantly flip it with Darkheart anymore will encourage people to try it with different factions more, because creatures with breakthrough or stealth can be a good way to trigger it as well. And in a really good Tempys deck, there's a lot of ways to trigger it. Like we talked about the Mystical Teacher being a way, because you can hit your opponent directly. Invocus or Assi or Mecha Mage are good ways to trigger it. It's just a body that keeps coming out. It's a level 3, so you can't Dreadbolt it, you can't Botanimate it until cycle 3 at the earliest, and you can come out as early as turn 1. So it is the cream of the crop in terms of. I mean, I would say it's kind of the set defining card. It's not just the best card in Tempys. I think it kind of defines Battle for Whitefang Pass, this card, just in how overpowered it is. It's been slightly blunted. It hasn't been completely nerfed with the rules change, and I think the rules change was good both for dealing with how oppressive this card was, as well as just making how transforms work more intuitive. Because it's not necessarily intuitive that transforming something would be playing it again. That's just kind of how they decided to implement it originally, but I think the rules change is actually a good thing for not just this Soulbind, but for all Soulbinds. It makes more sense that way. But yeah, there's not a lot really to talk that hasn't already been said. And if this is the first time you're hearing about it, again, I would check out the Discord and check out other channels and their commentary on this card because it's been talked about a lot.
Yeah.
um,
Just a couple other quick comments. If you're a new player and you happen to get a deck with one of these, uh, realize that you should probably try playing that deck because it's going to be pretty good regardless. But when you see some things like we talked about elemental synergy, the Rumble Spark embodiment is arguably the best elemental that you could have out on the board, and it's not that hard to get on the board. So the things that you should really take these decks to the next levels are Elementalist Ritual, Mystical Teacher, Ice Lance Magus, things that flip it. Because once you start stacking these things together and you're giving +4 to your Rumble Spark embodiment, things can get really out of control and the ceilings of these decks go through the roof.
yeah, and once you get this out, you basically always have an elemental in play because either your the creature in that lane is an elemental, or you have the Rumble Spark embodiment, which is an elemental. So having this, you can you're always going to be able to trigger your Elementalist Ritual. You're always going to be able to trigger, well, you can frequently trigger the Mystical Teacher.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very, very powerful card. Has a lot of synergy, and really plays up the elemental synergy in this set.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the end of our soul binds for Tempys. So let's just take it home. What do you think? What's your overall impression, Nate, of Tempys compared to Alpha?
Yeah, set 1 Alpha, I was excited by Tempys. I actually went out and traded for a lot of more Tempys. So if you look at my set 1 distribution of decks, it's heavily Tempys.
Yeah.
And then set 2 came along, and sure enough, it's more exciting in a lot of ways. I don't think there's many bad cards here, and compared to Aloyan, where there's flavor in Aloyan, but it doesn't necessarily hit the mark. I don't think they did a lot of that here. It is synergy, it is raw power in terms of attack buffing, and every soulbind's great, and all the Forgeborn abilities, which we'll get to in a separate episode, are great. I really like Tempys set 2. I think a lot of people would agree that Tempys set 2 is not just this card, but Tempys in general is almost set defining at how well it synergizes. We're seeing elementals, we're seeing a lot of great free spell plays still being present, and so yeah, that's my opinion. I think Tempys is probably the strongest faction in set 2. That's arguable.
For sure.
Yeah. Utera we'll get to. I like a lot as well, but yeah. What do you think of Tempys?
Yeah, I think Tempys definitely got a bit of a boost in set 2, and I don't think it lost a lot from set 1. Well, I feel like several of the cards that you could say replaced cards from set 1 were improvements. Like, for example, Warbringer Ritual kind of replaced Lightning Brand, and it's far more reliable. You know, the creatures, I mean, I think you lost a little bit in the dino area. I think I haven't counted the number of dinosaurs in Alpha, but you lost Rex, you lost Chant of Umbrook, which are 2 really important dino synergy cards. But other than dinos taking a bit of a hit, I think it definitely found kind of its identity a little bit more in this set, especially with the elemental synergy going on, and it has a little bit more oomph when it comes to spell synergy. So I think it definitely got a bit of a power increase, Rumble Spark aside.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, set 1 Tempys felt a lot like mages and dinos, which were shared, right? I mean, there were a lot of great mages in other factions, a lot of great dinos. Arguably, Utera had better dinos and Alpha as well. So here we have elementals and we have spell synergy, and we have a lot of great warriors. I think the warriors are much better in Tempys than Aloyan. So here I love it. We definitely see Tempys taking shape as a faction, and I really enjoy playing these cards, and I think they did a good job with set 2.
Yeah. What was your favorite card from the new set?
Yeah, I mean, one of my strongest decks includes Rumble Spark embodiment, and I think a lot of people can make that statement. So it's good, and if I want to lay down some competitive heat, I bring Rumble Spark. But Ator and all the soulbinds, I like them all. I actually have all the Tempys soulbinds, and I like playing them all. When I sit down to play casually, Lightning Runes, it's a lot of fun, and Ator as well. Yeah, so it's a great set of cards here to just have fun with casually, as well as and then do well competitively. You can pick up a set 2 Tempys that can have fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I think.
What was yours? Yeah.
Yeah,
what was
for me,
yours?
I think it's. Elemental Ritual has to be my favorite card. I
Mm.
just love. I don't know. I opened it at the Fuse Fest and I just fell in love with that card. It scratches a lot of my itches where it's powerful but flexible, and it just does some unique things with. There's just a lot of like combo potential, and it just makes me want to brew different decks to capitalize on it. It's in my Rumble Spark deck, so it's that kind of outshines it in a way, but also enables it. So I kind of want to make more decks with that Rumble Spark deck that isn't like specifically about flipping the Rumble Spark so much as it is about trying to capitalize on the Elementalist Ritual.
Yeah, I remember you coming back from Fuse Fest and showing me the card, and that was the first time I'd seen one of these ritual cards that have many lines of text. I was a little put off at the complexity because I think there's a lot of complexity in set two that was absent in set one.
Yeah.
But then experienced players like you and me have really embraced it, and there's probably untapped potential even, right? So to your point, there's probably even better ways to use this card. It's just people are going to the obvious synergies with Rumble Spark or some other cards
Yeah.
today.
I mean, it's been very meta defining the Rumble Spark, so it's hard for other things to shine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and wrap that up. So, to the listeners, what are your favorite Tempys cards? Do you think we kind of hit it on as far as what power level? Do you disagree with us? Do you agree with us? Leave a message in the comments, and we can expand the discussion. As always, if you guys can give us a like and a subscribe to the channel so you can be notified the next time one of these videos comes out. We're going to continue on through Utera and Necrium as well, and then have another just small episode on the new Forgeborn abilities, just so we cover all of our bases. And that wraps up this episode of Metasight. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.